Hey guys, Brad Gilmore here. Want to give a big shout out to our title sponsor, Walker Texas Lawyer. If you or a loved one have been injured in an accident, whether that be a car, truck, motorcycle accident, or some kind of other issue, hit up Walker Texas Lawyer at 713-552-1117 or walkertexaslawyer.com.
Oh, Brad, what have you done now?
Broadcasting live from Houston, Texas, and around the world. TV host, best-selling author, and radio personality Brad Gilmore brings you a collection of conversations with stars from movies.
Matthew McConaughey.
Brad Gilmore.
Mark Wahlberg.
Hey, how are you?
The legendary Mr. Christopher Lloyd. Christopher, how are we doing?
I'm doing good. Great introduction.
Television.
Jimmy Fallon joins us this morning. Jimmy, how you doing, my friend?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Brad, for having me. I appreciate this, bud.
Kelly Ripa.
Brad, thank you for having me.
Comedy.
Jay Leno joins us. Jay, how you doing?
Hey, Brad, what's going on?
Chris Tucker is in the building. Chris Tucker, good morning to you.
Hey, Brad. Good morning to you. How are you?
Gabriel Fluffy Iglesias.
Good morning.
Music.
Lola Monroe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The legendary frontman of AC/DC, Brian Johnson, joins us right now. Brian, how you doing?
Good morning, Brad. What lucky to talk to me, funny lad.
Grammy Award winner Maya joins us.
How are you?
And more. This is The Collection. Now your host, The Boat, Brad Gilmore.
And I am so excited to be able to talk to this person right now on the show, an acclaimed documentarian, an award-winning documentarian, here to talk about the new movie, or the new documentary, Grand Horizontals. It is the one and only Leslie Zemeckis. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Let's look. I love documentaries of all kinds. I'm actually fascinated by the documentary process, like from concept to laying it all out, doing the research, putting it together. But first and foremost, talk to me about why this particular subject matter attracted you to want to work on this film.
Well, for me, my documentaries have always answered a question that I was curious about, whether it was what is the history of burlesque from the women's point of view? What was it like to be in a freak show? What courage did it take to walk into a cage full of tigers, which were my first three documentaries. And then this one, it's like, who really were these women behind the labels? And we're a society that has always been about labeling and dismissing certain kinds of women in particular, circus freak, stripper, and courtesan, So I really wanted to take a dive. Who really were these people, these women, and where did they come from? And what was their life like? So to me, that's how it starts, and it's just my curiosity.
And to me, you as you said, there's the theme that you have in your documentaries, as you just laid out. This one, what I liked about it is I had zero idea of the subject matter at all. I had no information about it, and normally I find myself when I go watch a documentary, maybe I have a surface level understanding of it. Maybe I know a little bit about the backstory. And of course, we've heard names, as you said at the beginning of the film, like Marie Duplessis, and we knew, I've heard the name and somewhat aware, but the depth that you go through in this one, it is nice for the first time person coming to this subject matter. For you to want to cover, though, the breadth of this subject, when you're framing out the documentary, where do you start?
Well, always historically, and these women in particular, it was a particular time in France, in Paris, where these women were from, the Second Empire, Napoleon III, roughly 1852 to 71. It was very particular time in history where France was doing really well economically. Department stores are coming in, the middle class is coming up, the rich are getting richer. And it was all about showing your wealth. And these women really thrived in that. And part of it was because the men, they weren't kept secret. If you were seen with a certain kind of woman, and there weren't very many of the Grand Horizontals because you had to really have a lot of money to afford them. But if you were seen with one, you looked really good. You knew how much you were paying for that, or other people knew. It was really a status symbol to be with these women.
Yeah, and you liken them to the pop stars of today, is what it says in the description.
Absolutely were. They absolutely were. People would go to the Bois de Boulogne, which I'm probably slaughtering the name, the big park, and they would watch them ride in their carriages. And then in the paper would be everything they wore. They went to the opera, they went here. I mean, that's who was being written about obsessively.
Now, when you talk about somebody like a Marie Duplessis, how do you, when doing the research, how do you separate, historical fact from some of the mythology, around someone like her? Because there is a lot out there.
Right. Well, she's a good one because there is a lot of documentation on her. I go through old newspapers, and a lot of them were in America. They were so famous they were writing about them here. So it's just a deep dive, and I do 99.9% of the research myself. So I can keep all the names, I can keep all the threads, but it's really just doing a deep dive. I went to Paris. I went to one of the houses that's still there of one of these women. They let me film in there a couple times. And now I just go back and I'm like, can I sit in this room? It's incredible. So I was lucky enough to be hands-on to go where a lot of these women were. And it's just a deep, deep dive. I've been reading on this subject matter for a good 10, 15 years, only because I was just fascinated by these women.
Then so you're reading from it for 10, 15 years. When was the point where you said, okay, you know what, it's time, I'm done reading about it. It's time to put some pen to the paper, some film to the screen.
Well, it was never an idea that I would do a documentary on them, because my other documentaries always made sure that there was enough footage. I didn't want to just have photographs, but I thought, so many art paintings, photographs, it was the early days of photographs, were taken of these women. And I thought I can do a little bit of recreating. I found 3 girls in particular, 3 or 4, God, I can't remember now, that looked exactly like some of these women. And I hired them to do some light recreation. If it's a film about sex, you have to have a little bit of not sex, but nudity and
Sure.
beautiful, to mirror the artwork that they posed for. So that's what really drove me once I was like, this is how I can tell the story. I can tell them through the paintings. I can tell them through the books that they were the subject of. And these girls were incredible.
Yeah, and when you're watching the film from the very get-go, I mean, the first word you see on the screen is whore, and you're like, okay, we're in. We're here. We're going for it. So I guess again, so you have this research and this information about it. What is like the timeline process? Do you say, because to me it's different from, let's say, a film where okay, this is the character, this is the arc, these are the beats I want to have happen. You have control of the narrative if you're the screenwriter, but the documentarian has to tell the story with fidelity, but also know how to tell the right parts of the story and what isn't maybe necessary information. I don't know how you discern between that.
Well, this, I don't know. I just took a narrow focus and wrote the narration, of course, and everything. So I wanted it understood. I wanted it understood historically. I wanted you to see what each woman went through as much as possible, to really have an understanding of really where they came from and what women's lives were like in those days, in Paris in particular. If you were a shop girl and you were born to a certain class, you're not leaving that class. If you're a shop girl, you're making pennies or the equivalent of it. So there was really no way to get out of that. And I wanted to show the contrast for these women who did the best that they absolutely could and led extravagant, amazing lives. I mean, really extravagant.
Yeah, the pomp and circumstance, I guess, of the courtesans is kind of what surprised me, because again, like when use the terminology of the pop stars of their day, and it's not something you would think of, but kind of in some ways, it is still like that today, right? I mean, especially with the way that I think that Instagram has blown up, and then there's the social media, the Instagram model, the OnlyFans accounts. It's still a thing that's kind of around today in a different format, but still.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and it's like, putting on your face and that certain clothes and these certain jewels before you leave, your house for other people to see and write about you.
Yeah, it is.
And there was one character, Castiglione, who took over, I think, 200 photographs of herself. So she was, doing that first selfie thing.
Yeah, she was on the train very early on, a very early adopter of it.
Yeah.
How do you how do you, how do you decide between, and ride the line between entertainment and information in a documentary? Because you have to keep someone engaged. And to me, nowadays, the TikTok brain is what it is, and people, want to stay engaged in the entertainment factor and the sensationalism, but also the documentary needs to tell the informational part of the narrative as well. How do you balance the two?
Well, beautiful semi and totally nude girls, usually will keep people's interest. And it's, I like to use more modern music. I wouldn't say there's fast cuts, but there's some that I think you just keep the pace. I don't know. I have that brain too. It's like, okay, it's time to move on, What, during your research and putting the film together, was the part that stuck out to you the most, is the most interesting thing that you learned on this journey? I think it was really contrasting them with married women's life of any stature, that you could be a wealthy woman and you marry your husband who's also wealthy. Your home's not in your name. Your wealth isn't in your name. To spend that money, you must go through your husband. You can't divorce your husband at the time. He could divorce you. So if it's a bad marriage, you're stuck. And really that there was just no choices, where there was this independence and the freedom of the courtesans, because they weren't dependent on usually one protector. They could have as many as they wanted. They chose the man. And that was just kind of revelatory to me. You think, oh, they're with this guy and they're dependent on him. And if he, decides to go with another woman, but it's usually they were the ones deciding who they were going to see and who they were going to be with and who was going to buy them the house. There are many houses.
Many chateaus, and villas, as it were.
Yeah.
When a few years ago, I had the opportunity to write a book, and when I approached and I pitched it and they went with it, I said, oh, great. I got the green light to do this thing. And then I thought, wait a minute, now I actually have to do it. And then when I went through the process, it was the most arduous thing I'd ever done. And I said, I never want to do that again. And then 6 months later, I had another idea that I wanted to go pitch. Is it the same with documentary? Like, where you're like, hey, I have this idea, I'm going to do it. And then you're like, this is the most, sometimes frustrating, challenging process I've ever gone through. Why am I submitting myself to this?
I don't know. I think I write books too. I like to go between them, like usually have a book out and then a documentary. It kind of balances that hard work because they're different, but they're similar. But I just wait until a subject absolutely just takes over and I'm just obsessed by it and want to explore it more and then to show it to people.
What
so you forget the pain, like childbirth.
What are the biggest differences? That's interesting. What are the big differences between maybe outlining a book and writing one versus a documentary?
Well, how they're similar to me, I think of my films as chapters. It's like, here's this chapter, this chapter, this chapter, and the timelines. But obviously, the documentary, it's visual. So sometimes you can just take a break and I don't have to find the right word. I can just scroll for an image or some footage to show that part of the story. So I think that's a little bit of a relief on the brain sometimes. If you're struggling for that perfect sentence, it's not working, but an image in the documentary can take over and do so much work for you.
How hard is it whenever you are going through it and then you say, okay, I'm going through the edits, I've put it together, it feels good. How hard is it for you to lock picture and feel like it's finished? Or do you go back and say, oh man, I could have done this, or I should have changed that, I could have put this bit of music here?
I think there's just a point you're like, I'm done. I want this out. Like, I don't want to look at one more edit. I don't want to, sit in front of my Avid one more day. It's like, and you get excited that you want people to see your story.
Right. Yeah.
So go be free.
And then at some point you just have to live with it, right? You have to say, look, this is the best it's going to get. It's out there now. Let the people consume it.
Absolutely.
Now
it's great when you get, it doesn't, I think it wouldn't matter as much, but it's also nice to get a bunch of awards for your film. Well, I was really surprised this did. I wasn't sure, the subject matter and the nudity, how much that would, but yeah, it did great.
Yeah, it's nice to get the pat on the back, right? And know that people responded to the story. I mean, sometimes you wonder, like, are people actually going to gravitate to it? Or are they going to care about it as much as I do? And obviously, people are responding. That's got to be a great feeling.
Yeah.
Was being a documentarian and writing, was this always part of the plan? Was this always in the field of vision?
Being a documentarian, no. Writing, yes. And then once I started it, I was like, I like this art form very, very much. I was just teaching a documentary class the other night at UCSB up here, and I said, there is a documentary for everybody. You can, whatever subject matter it is, maybe it's short, maybe it's long, you're going to find people to like your documentary, to want to watch your documentary. It's more forgiving in that way than the commitment of a film and the money that you've got to put into a film. There is just, people are interested by these weird, true stories.
And it's kind of been somewhat of a renaissance for documentaries lately with all the streaming platforms where this film will be available. People are really binging more on documentaries than ever before. And the thing is, look, I am no filmmaker, trust me. I am not anywhere close. But I've always had that itch. I'm like, oh man, I would love to. There's like a couple stories that I've always wanted to, like, man, this would be really fun to put together. And I thought maybe an audio documentary, maybe this, maybe that. But I don't even know where to start. Where does somebody start other than the research? But when it's time to put it together, like, is there a step 1, 2, 3, or is each process different?
I think it could be each process is different, but I tell, my book community, and I also tell my filmmaking community to build community. So you can go find, a DP. My first film, I went to my friend, Sherry Hellard, and she was in acting class with me. And I was like, I want to do this documentary on burlesque. Let's get a camera and do it. So it's finding the people who are like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And then you learn along the way. You just do it. It's not like, oh, I've got to read a book. I've got to do step. You, of course, watch a ton of documentaries. You read a ton of books, figure out how you tell a story, and then start shooting it and then edit it.
Yeah, but it all comes together in the edit, right? That's what everyone always says. It comes, and then how do you know, though, like, because this one I felt like the perfect length. This documentary was. It got into the meat of the story. You were engaged, like I said, from the very first word that comes on the screen. You're engaged the whole way through, and I didn't feel like I needed anything was left on the table. It was very concise but perfectly paced. How do you find that as a director?
I think it's just a feeling again of really knowing story and not like, oh, I need to make it a certain length. I need to make it longer. It was like, no, my story is told.
Do you seek feedback? Like, do you go and ask for feedback from people, or do you trust your own vision?
Not a lot. Sometimes I if it's a subject matter that maybe isn't familiar, although I didn't on this one, but like my first one, I went to my husband. I was like, do you understand the story? And that would be important to me. And it's also my editor. I mean, I do the first edit of all my films. And then my editor comes in. So it's like, do you get this? So it's like just having that fresh eye. Does this make sense to you? Because I'm so close to it. I think, everybody's going to understand. But I don't take it out far and wide.
Yeah.
You know, because then you start getting a bunch of feedback and it's like, no, this is what I'm doing. I'm super confident about what the story is that I want to tell.
I think that is important when you're so in the weeds on a certain subject, though, and you know so much about it to try to make sure, hey, this is going to translate. People are going to understand the world that I'm setting up. And I guess that's something that you probably have to really think about the way that you're going to introduce this story. Tell me how the opening frames of this one came to you.
Well, you know, I just started looking up because most people don't know what the word courtesan is.
Right.
And they don't know a grande horizontal. And I thought, what are all these words that we have used for women? And, you know, I just stayed them all. And I thought, you know, let's take away, hopefully, a little sting of some of these words, like the first word being whore. It's like, okay, you want to call me, her, that. Look at what my life was like. You know, it's just taking back that, owning it. And I think they did own it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I feel like, I don't know. I mean, from my understanding from watching the documentary and then actually doing a little supplementary reading, it seemed as though they didn't really care too much about any vernacular thrown their way because they were living these lavish lifestyles, which to me, again, was so interesting. I just never knew about this subject and just about everything that came along with it. I really was fascinated and enthralled from beginning to end. And then when you screen this the first time, like, what is that process like? Do you get a group of close friends together? Do you want an audience?
Then it's usually it's like the cast and crew. I think that was the first who saw it before we went to all the festivals. And that's, you know, that's nerve-wracking. Are they going to get it? Are they going to like it? So you just hope.
Do you get a sense in the room though? Like when you're screening it for the first time, you feel the energy?
Yeah. I mean, you can feel when something's playing or something's poignant and it's coming across.
Now, whenever I do anything, I've been married now going on 2 years. I show my wife everything. I say, hey, what do you think of this? And again, I have weird interests, whether it be pro wrestling or all these weird things, right? Or music. And I go and say, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? What do you think of this? Because I like the feedback from somebody who I know is going to give it to me straight. You mentioned in early documentaries, you went to your husband, who's an accomplished filmmaker in his own right. Are you trepidatious at all from somebody who has a similar background in filmmaking? Because maybe they would take a different approach at it, so you don't really want to hear that advice?
No, and I don't go ahead. It's afterwards. It'll be for story. And, you know, there was some things from my first film that he's like, oh, you got to take this out and this out and this out. I was like, no, you can't take that out. That person's too important. I'm not doing it. My editor's like, he said, take it out. I was like, you put that back in. I'm right.
Well, I mean, it's your story, right? And everyone's going to have a different perspective.
There's certain things that I knew about it. It was like, you can't cut out that person.
Right. Now, do you go to him for any of the technical things, not so much story of like, hey, is there a way that I could maybe do this more effectively or anything like that?
No, a lot of that I'll do to my editor, the technical stuff. It's like, you know, we need like an interesting cut here to get to this, to that transition. That's mostly.
Now, when you screen these after the cast and crew screening, do you ever go back and then say, oh, you know what? While I was watching, I did see that, and maybe I want to change this, and that. Or by the time it gets there, it's pretty much finished. Yeah,
by the time it gets there, you've watched it 5,000 times and made all those changes already. Yeah, it's like, please lock it, send it away.
Is it hard when you go to the festivals then to have to watch it again?
No, it's kind of because then you've got a bigger audience and you're like, oh, what is like people that don't know you, what is their reaction going to be? So that's always fun. And to see it on a big screen and different places, that's great.
Do you have that like anticipation of like, okay, wait till they get to this part, I want to see the reaction here?
Sometimes. Well, I love the first word. I love the first frame that comes up.
And what's been the reaction from audiences? Like when they see that, is there laughter? Is it like, oh, okay, or what do you get in the theater?
I just think there's like a silence, and like I can feel them kind of, okay, I'm here because what am I going to get next?
They're leaning in, right?
Yeah.
Now, were there, I guess when you first start the filmmaking process in general, were there blueprints that you had? Were there films or documentaries that you loved that you would watch and say, I kind of want to do something like this?
Always Ken Burns. He's my hero. I think he tells a beautiful, really clean, really compelling story. And he's always interested in the truth. He's always interested in the history. So I would say that, but I like to watch a wide variety. I'm looking at angles, I'm looking at cuts, like how are they, what are they bringing to it? Oh, I like this, I don't like this. So I try and just watch when I'm working out, I'll just put on a doc and just explore.
Is there a subject matter that you have your eye on currently that you're like, okay, this is going to be something that I really want to dive into soon?
Yeah, I think so. I'm about to write a little pitch for one, I think.
Oh,
There's
yeah?
actually two. Yeah.
Has there been a documentary you've seen lately that you really stuck with you? Like I watched one before yours. I saw this one called The Greatest Night in the History of Pop. I don't know if you know what this is. It's about the making of We Are the World, the song We Are the World.
Yeah.
And it's on Netflix. And it's really great because it's all this footage I've never seen before. And I'm a music buff and historian. And that really grabbed me. And I didn't know the song was made all in one night. And this was something that was a new thing that kind of grabbed me. Was there one that's recently touched you?
Not recently, but in light of what's happened, the Navalny one, I thought was and I thought when I watched it, a year ago, how compelling it was. I really want to go back and watch it again. Just because he's so right into the camera, and that's gone now. So that's interesting what they captured.
Do you feel like streaming has made documentaries a bigger medium than they were previously? Because I feel, as we talked about on Netflix or Amazon, Hulu, iTunes, Apple, they all have this platform that you can reach so many people in their homes. To where I felt like documentaries you'd catch them on TV, the Ken Burns on PBS or what have you, but now they're so accessible, and I feel like people flock to documentaries more than they used to.
Yeah, it's great having that accessibility. I mean, I hear stuff all the time. It's like, oh, I'm going to go watch it. It's not like you have this like tiny window, and then it's gone, and you might never see it again or ever. So, yeah, I think that's really made it accessible. And I hear people all the time suggesting, look at this. I watched this doc. This was good. Yeah, it's great.
Now, other than some of the stuff that we've talked about before for Grand Horizontals, what do you want people to take away from this when they see it?
Oh, I just want them, like I do with, I think everything I've done is to look behind the label, and to see what these women were dealing with. And I have a line in the thing. It's, we don't need to condemn that. We don't need to condone them, but we don't need to condemn them either.
Well, it's true.
Yeah. It's like, it's just have an understanding and openness instead of just, shutting down what the subject is or preconceived ideas of what a certain life is like.
Now, for me, as being such a movie fan as I am, I'm always fascinated too by what films other people go to. So, like, what are your go-to rewatches? Like, documentary, TV show, film, whatever. What are the movies that you like to cling to?
Well, I think I'm on my third run of The Sopranos.
So good.
I mean, you just really can't beat it. I remember watching it, obviously, a long time ago. And then during the pandemic, I said to my kids, you really got to watch this. And then I start back again. Like, it was an amazing show, and it still is. And, it's still shocking, and it's still funny, and it's still relevant. And it's just, the acting's insane.
Yeah, when I watched The Sopranos when I was younger, it frightened me more. And when I actually started rewatching it as well about a month ago, and rewatching the first season, which I think is Man, what a great way to start a show. That first season is so spectacular. But I find myself finding more of the humor in it than I did when I was younger. It is a really funny show.
It's really funny. I mean, they'll be doing the most awful things and it's funny. And that's what, I try and I was saying in this class I gave the other night, no matter what the subject is, you got to find that humor. I mean, it just breaks things for people, gives them a relief of like, oh my God, I'm seeing this, and this, and I think that was like once in a lifetime show and cast and everything. So that's kind of my go-to. I don't know. It's so funny. People are like, oh, have you seen this new show? And I'm like, well, I'm about to watch The Sopranos again.
I'm a serial rewatcher too. I rewatch stuff all the time.
I get a lot of stuff. I get out of it, I don't catch everything the first time.
There's no way you can. There's no way you can take in. I'm sure I'm going to go back and watch. I want to watch your documentary again with my wife because I feel like I would love to hear her perspective on it. And I feel like I'm going to catch stuff again that I didn't pick up the first time because, again, there's so many elements that can come into play when you're watching something. And that's why I love the rewatch. I feel like movies and TV shows are like songs. I just need to keep listening and keep watching.
Yeah, you get some. And I try and really pack mine in with just so much information because, I don't know, I love information.
Well, and you might as well give it all to them while you got them.
Yeah.
Was there something Was there something you had to leave out of this? Like that you're like, oh, this is a real interesting story, but it just doesn't really it doesn't fit into the narrative exactly.
No, this one was really just tight. It was. You
got it. You nailed it. It's here. It's here. It's Grand Horizontals. Leslie Zemeckis. Again, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I really appreciate you doing this. I appreciate you telling stories. And telling stories that make people think, telling stories that make people's perspectives maybe shift and their eyes widen and their minds grow from something that, like I said, I didn't know about before. And now, trust me, I'm going to be dropping all this knowledge in dinner conversations and people are going to look at me like I'm educated and I'm going to fool them again. Right. Thanks to Leslie Zemeckis.
Say, wait, go watch her documentary.
Yes, you need to go check this out on the streamers. It is Grand Horizontals. Thank you so much, Leslie Zemeckis, for joining us today.
Thank you. Awesome.